What Western society is seen as the ideal man has changed significantly over time, and the ideal male concept really hasn't been driven by sex appeal either. It's mostly been driven by power dynamics. And when I refer to ideal male in this video, I'm not just talking about body, but I'm talking about body and mind. I'm talking about what society has seen as most ideal for a male during different periods of time. Before we really get into this video, I just want to state the obvious. Let's not pretend like I'm the ideal male in today's society. Most people aren't, and that's fine. But considering a whopping 78% of my viewers are male, I thought that we could all find this video interesting. Do people now always agree with how people thought in the past and how they treated each other? Absolutely not. And a lot of these concepts are based off of their mindsets. I also wanted to say there's going to be some generalizations, because there has to be when talking about an ideal standard of anything in society. To begin our journey on how the ideal male has changed over time in Western society, we're going to take it all the way back to the hunter-gatherer days. Based on early cave paintings, the ideal hunter-gatherer male was assumed to be a heavier man. Theoretically, with the hunter-gatherer, it's a bit more spotty because they didn't have like words, so the researchers figured this out through cave paintings. Those without resources often had to hunt and gather, but the hunter-gatherer guys with access to stable resources could stay still, more or less, and kind of feast whenever they wanted, which often resulted in them having larger bodies. Ancient Egypt is believed to have seen youth and long hair as ideal. Wigs were apparently a reflection of higher status. The bigger the wig, the bigger the status, or something. Ancient Greeks viewed the ideal male as less realistic and more aspirational. Many statues reflected the most ideal men in ancient Greek society. Muscle groups were sized in sculptures based on ideal ratios that were not necessarily meant to be achievable. It's been said that one of the biggest compliments you could have given a guy in ancient Greece is saying that he looked like a statue, because nobody actually looked like a statue. But in real life, it's said that a lot of ancient Greek men would spend a lot of time at the gymnasium working out. And it's also said that a portion of ancient Greek men spent obsessive amounts of times at these gymnasiums trying to get the most perfect body as possible, which definitely mirrors the modern day. Not like I would know. Fitness, though, was just one part of the ideal male Greek package. Yes, I said package, because I'm going to talk about dicks. The ideal man was not seen as wild and reckless. Control, arts, and education were also key in his life. And physical fitness, more or less, was an extension of that control. And this, in ancient Greek art, was reflected on the wee-wee. If the ding-dong was big, it would mean that the ding-dong drove his life. So the ding-dong was then made small on ancient Greek art to show that the man had power over his sexual desires and his body in general. It's not like all the ancient Greek men had tiny dicks. I'd like to move on. Ancient Romans. Gentlemen watching, and also everybody, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? I mean, right now, I know that you're thinking about it because we're talking about it. Ancient Rome had some different values from ancient Greece. Generally, ancient Rome was more militaristic. There were gladiators, which I talk about in a different video, about why modern audiences like to watch violence, if that interests you. But gladiators were often thought to be lesser citizens. Society did not send in their ideal men to fight to the death for their entertainment. You know what I mean? Romans largely injected the idea of power dynamics into the ideal man. Many Roman citizens stopped caring as much about the buff, unrealistic bodies that the Greeks cared about. Instead, there's apparently more of a shift towards power and virtue as being more ideal. Many Roman statues de-emphasized youth and featured older men, and had more realistic body proportions with imperfections. Muscular aesthetics were still important, at least on some level, but the idea of an ideal man having status took more of a hold on what was considered ideal. A lot changed in the European Middle Ages, including a lot with society. People didn't feel so comfortable with nudity anymore. The physicality of a man being ideal largely melted away, and the ideal man, regardless of what his physical traits were, was more or less thought to be spiritually in tune with Christ. During the Middle Ages, physical fitness was was often seen as bad because physical fitness meant that you were doing physical labor and that you were poor. But what really made a man ideal was his spirit. But the Renaissance changed everything. The Renaissance saw some of those dusty robes drop a bit, and society saw some returns to the old ancient Greek ideals of the ideal man. Culture began to explode in the Renaissance after the bleak Middle Ages. As humans began to tame and understand the world around them, science, art, and all that stuff became important again to a lot of people. What society began to see as ideal was the ability to master a bunch of skills. Hence the rise of the term Renaissance man. Again, could not relate. As the Renaissance passed on, the ideal man was once again seen as influential. Not so much a man with extraordinary skills or looks, but a man with money. Someone with power. What happened was, a whole class of individuals began to rise up with money, like dukes or whatever. And at that time, those with resources did not want to change themselves to fit some ideal standard. They wanted to be exactly who they were, but powerful. In the Gilded Age, the ideal man was often seen as a larger individual who had access to resources. As was often thought in previous time periods, if you were poor, you would end up having to do physical labor, which might result in your body being lean or muscular. But if you had money, you didn't have to do physical labor, which would often grant you the luxury of gaining weight. This idea was so strongly held, the elite men of the time often joined fat man clubs, where you had to be 200 pounds minimum to join, and men would have weigh-in competitions where they would try to be as large as possible. But two things happened in the early 20th century which drastically changed the idea of the ideal man, and everything really changed in a short period. In the 1920s, mass media depictions of the ideal man grew throughout film. The ideal man was thought to be much skinnier than he previously had been during the Gilded Age. Two things happened in the 1920s that really changed the idea of the ideal man. The first is that obesity was thought to be unhealthy by society, where previously it was viewed more as a status symbol. And second, the people who made movies thought they needed to cast skinnier actors because they genuinely believed that the camera added 20 pounds. And that version of the ideal man was projected into society. The 1930s and 1940s saw a push towards men being tough. I mean, let's be honest here. Life sucked in the 1930s and 1940s in the United States of America. You had the Great Depression, and that went into World War II. What a time to be alive. And a mindset apparently arose that if you were tougher than the other guy, then he couldn't bother you. And if you were the toughest, you were the most ideal. In the 1950s, the United States of America began to settle down after World War II. And the ideal man, therefore, was a successful businessman, or, whatever field he was in. There was an overemphasized importance put on height, with several companies outright stating that they would not hire an executive who was under 6 feet tall. The 1960s and 70s saw a split in cultural attitudes in what made the ideal man. On one hand, many people continued the traditions from the 1950s, but there was a counterculture, and the counterculture de-emphasized gender aesthetics, resulting in their ideal male being more androgynous. I don't know how to say that word. The two versions of the ideal man kind of split even further in the 1980s. The more traditional view of masculinity became really manly. The second variation of the ideal man was more feminine, except still masculine. And a third version of the ideal man began to emerge in the 1980s, the whippersnapper. They actually were not called whippersnappers, I just used that term because I like the word whippersnapper. They were kind of in the middle, and this type really seemed to rise in the 1990s. What's said to be a defining moment in the 1990s for ideal masculinity was Mark Wahlberg's Calvin Klein photo shoot thing. It said that Mark Wahlberg largely reshaped the idea of ideal masculinity. The term heterosexual began to be thrown around, a term that I completely forgot existed until I researched this video. A heterosexual is a man who takes care of himself, who was fit and used skincare products or, whatever, and who cared at least to some level about fashion, more as an everyday man versus something that might be unattainable. But if things stayed this way, Not a chance. We are currently in an age where the concept of an ideal man is being questioned itself. The 2000s and early 2010s saw a rise of incredibly buff men being seen as the ideal man, and a rise in hyper-specific macro diets so that men could get a complete hold on their physique. The general ideal muscle man of today is more aesthetic than ever before. Recently, there seems to be a split in cultural attitudes towards what's considered an ideal man. Pop culture, at its core, is dying. Mass media previously directed the public's attention in one direction, but in today's society, we're more individualized than ever. TikTok has a For You page. Our streaming services show individualized feeds. You only found this video because an algorithm thought that you personally would like it, unless a friend sent this to you or something. The individual has been rising above what's considered pop culture. But with an increase of individualism, we're currently seeing a split in what is considered to be the ideal man. On one hand, we still have the guys with toned bodies that most of us could only dream to achieve, but on the other hand, we also have a rise in skinnier men being seen as more ideal. We also are seeing a rise in general body positivity with a come as you are attitude. Masculinity itself is being questioned by a lot of people and often de-emphasized. The ideal man concept is all over the place right now, and the only consistent thing is that there is no consistent thing. I'm not really sure what's going to be considered ideal in the future, and we have to ask ourselves, really, does it matter? I say we all be the best versions of ourselves, whatever that means for any of us. For me, that would mean, getting buff, which I should really get on that. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Yeah, I already know I've asked that, but I'm trying to transition. The Roman Empire viewed violence as entertainment. But the way that modern society views violence as entertainment and the way that Romans viewed violence as entertainment are very different. If you want to know why, as humans, we love to watch violence and how that relates to the Roman Empire, please click on this video next. And thank you so much for watching.